Hello YouTube. Listen, I hope everybody is safe and healthy, and I hope everybody stays this way. I do want to let you know that even during the times of coronavirus, UFOs are still observed over our planet. Just not that long ago, I would say beginning of March of this year, I received information about UFOs that have been observed over the city of Ussr in Ukraine, and of course people were concerned. I do want to talk about other observations of UFOs and show some correlation between what I had already reported a few years ago, and you can see my video. A link is going to be provided in the description to this video. It had to do with an alleged shoot down of a UFO in the Soviet Central Asia. And I want to correlate to the information that was recently obtained and presented by Ukrainian ufologists in their website, Novosti Ufologi, a very good website. I often use it for my research, so I want to talk about them as well. I know my Russian colleague Mikhail Gerstein also publishes his information on that website. He is the most capable, in my opinion, of Russia's UFO researchers, a very prolific writer and lecturer and field researcher. So what I want to talk today about is going back to Central Asia and in the area of Sary-Shagan. I will talk about the radar stations of the missile attack warning systems Daryal-U, Dnieper, and Dniester, and the State Anti-Ballistic Missile Defense Research and Test Range number 10 of the USSR Ministry of Defense, and observations by private of the Soviet Armed Forces Alexander Shursin during his military service in 1973-1974 in the military town of Balkhash 9. Private Alexander often visited the military training and testing ground Sary-Shagan, which is located west of the town with the same name, in the local desert of Betlak Dala. Various anti-missile systems were tested at the secret test site during those years, and so that you know, tests are still continuing today, although there is of course no Soviet Union anymore, and there is a whole new entity in its place. So Balkhash 9 had radar stations of the missile attack warning system, and there were also several long-range sectoral radar stations at the Sary-Shagan test site, designed to detect, track, measure coordinates and calculate the trajectory parameters of ballistic missiles and artificial Earth satellites. Construction of the landfill at the city began in 1956. The main criteria for choosing the terrain for the test site were, as in the creation of the missile ranges, Kapustin Yar and the Scientific Research Institute testing range number 5, Baikonur. Well, again, the main criteria were the presence of sparsely populated plain forestless terrain, a large number of cloudless days, and the lack of valuable farmland. The administrative center of the landfill was the so-called closed town of Priozersk, located on the shores of the waterless semi-desert Lake Balkhash. And if you listen to my video presentations about Soviet military history, such names should be now familiar to you, because I've talked about other cases around that area. Because UFOs are attracted to such secret military facilities. Now let me tell you what a closed city or closed town it was and is. It's a settlement where travel or residency restrictions are applied so that specific authorization is required to visit or remain overnight. They may be sensitive military establishments or secret research installations that require much more space or freedom than is available in a conventional military base. Many such closed cities and towns existed in the Soviet Union until its collapse in 1991. Now, after 1991, a number of them still existed in the Commonwealth of Independent States countries. Of course, especially in Russia. Now, in modern Russia, such places are artificially known as closed administrative territorial formations, закрытые административно-территориальное образование, or ZATO. Now, let's get back to Central Asia of 1970s. Slightly to the south, near the Bay of Kashkatenis, there was a test site of laser weapons called Terra 3. And I think there is not much that remains of it today, but it was quite prolific and active. Now, besides that area where UFOs have been observed and Private Alexander knew about it, he also served in the Caucasus Mountains area and lands. And this was another location in the Soviet Union at the time, of course. And although he did not visually observe anomalies or UFOs, but he was present and witnessed repeated discussions by officers of the periodic manifestations of UFOs and the impact from these unidentified objects on the equipment, on military equipment. In the early 1970s, remember, if you listen to my videos, in the early 1970s, there were no special instructions from the Soviet Ministry of Defense for the recording of unidentified objects over military installations. This happened later, towards late 1970s. See, the phenomenon of UFOs at that time was not yet so public, and more often encounters with abnormal or anomalous phenomena remained only, through the hearsay among the military, due to the status of the level of secrecy of military facilities. So the issue was there was complete secrecy around such facilities, and of course UFOs were mostly a taboo subject, and nobody for sure knew whether it was the Chinese or the Americans or UFOs hovering over them, except those who were technologically educated knew quite well that no terrestrial civilization could come up with such fast-moving objects in the sky or in the water and so forth. So, according to Alexander, from time to time, without really reasons that were identified, suddenly and spontaneously disconnected automatic sector radars, military radars, and that puzzled the military leadership. It was not possible that they would disconnect by themselves those radars, because it was no Soviet operators who stopped them or started them. The control recording equipment self-disconnected up to 20 minutes and also then self-started. Investigations of periodic outages did not detect failures in technology, but it was found that sometimes abnormal outages were detected during the recording of various UFOs. There were also cases of UFO properties being detected when they were recorded visually, but were absent from radar screens. Shortly before the collapse of the Soviet Union, the country's media published reports which claimed that the military allegedly managed to shoot down several UFOs in the late 1970s and early 1980s over the test site Sary-Shagan. Allegedly, both air defense missiles and installations with high-density lasers were used. Due to the fact that the alleged events took place after the end of Alexander's service, he cannot confirm them, but does not exclude them. The fact that various UFOs periodically show interest in military objects and affect the technology, this is not questionable, and I again urge you to look at my video recorded some years ago where I present more information about the showdown. This is very important because it shows that the Soviets were able to use the technology from the UFO they shot down. Of course, what we know is even less than a tip of an iceberg, but at least it's something and should not be forgotten. But I want to talk a little bit more about Soviet military observations. Now we're going to speak about Russia, which also was part of the USSR, of course. USSR consisted of a number of different republics, like Ukraine, where I'm from, or Georgia, or Latvia, and so forth. They were all part of the USSR. Now, we're talking now about Russia. The town of Kimri, Kimsky district of the Tver region. The observer was private of the Soviet Armed Forces, Mikhail Zhulitov. A description, it was an optical observation point of air defense forces, and it was radar station 5D35. During the service in the years 1988 and 1990 in the town of Kimra, Private Zhulitov was the operator of the automatic control systems of the military unit, and the number of the unit was 71584. Mikhail tasks included the control of flights of aviation and also providing alert to the Air Defense Command. In 1989, and it was not in the winter, this is underlined, between 1 and 2 a.m. one day, the military unit received readiness alert number 1. At the time of this alert, Mikhail was asleep and he was replaced by his colleague Ivan Chernokhlebov. Running out of the barracks in the direction of the tracking command station to turn on the equipment and initiate launch, Mikhail, who was already awoke, he saw at an altitude of about 200 meters, some 60 meters from the horizon, he saw a glow from an unidentified light source. Looking closely, he observed a glowing, roundish, disc-shaped object, about 100 to 200 meters in diameter, bluish-white in color, hovering in a horizontal projection. The glow was brighter than the full moon and illuminated the entire area in the forest. Also, due to the alert, the command and technical control unit was activated. Running to the tracking command and launching station, the private and his colleagues initiated antenna salute. Its range was 16 kilometers. Well, it turned out that the directed signals, radio waves, in the direction of the UFO hovering point did not reflect or detect anything. So, Soviet privates observed UFO, but not the equipment, which is not a typical case. It's happened before. Operators of photo control of the radar, when sending the camera to the object, managed to register it when they fixated the camera on that object, as the equipment took periodic pictures with a certain frequency. After 5 minutes, Mikhail notified the Air Defense Command about the situation. And after a couple of minutes, he again went out and observed the object moving at high velocity. It first began to fly vertically upwards and then changed the trajectory to the side, right, left, until the source of radiation completely disappeared. The total flight time was 1 minute. The total observation time was about 8 minutes. As it turned out later, a military fighter plane was dispatched to intercept the UFO. This Soviet military aircraft actually spooked the unidentified object. But having a reason to a maximum altitude of 22 kilometers and losing sight of the object, it was not possible for the Soviet aircraft to catch up with it at such high velocity. Later, the authorities claim that there were repeated hovering of unidentified objects over the military units. A year before the incident, in 1988, there was a recorded case of spontaneous departure from the silo of a military air defense missile, which was successfully destroyed in an unspecified way. The case was written off, attributed to malfunction of the relevant equipment. So what I want to tell you, I want to again underline that when the Soviet Union was disintegrating, information started coming out, and at that time my articles in Russian which were published in the West about the history of American, Australian, and West European ufology, where they were translated and published in the Soviet Union. And late 1980s, 1989, that's when the taboo was taken off the subject of UFOs by Mikhail Gorbachev, whom I greatly respect. Now, for a few years, we had very intensive and interesting information that was coming from the Soviet Union. I think in 1993 it definitely stopped. 1994, that was the end of it for sure. But we had about, I would say, 5 or 6 years of great information that was classified. It was coming out because the Soviet Union was experiencing period of glasnost and perestroika, restructuring, of course, and the freedom to speak. And this was great because freedom was in the air, and people started discussing objects that they could not even dream of speaking before. And I have observations of military, naval personnel, of course, and aircraft officers and high Soviet brass speaking about UFO incidents. I will be bringing more of such stories and episodes to my audience's attention, because we should not forget it. I always stress that it wasn't only the United States or Western Europe where UFO history was being forged. Well before the United States, 1947, there were observations in the Russian Empire, of course, and in the Soviet Union, and people collected them, sometimes risking freedom for that. Of course, there is China and other places on this planet, but it's a global phenomenon, and we should always compare observations, because you will see that a big picture is coming out from the fog, from the the situation where you have disjointed stories from here and there, but a bigger picture is coming out, and you can see that the same objects, slightly different sometimes, but mostly the same objects, are observed over great distances and territories. And with the case of the country where I'm from, the Soviet Union, we had this massive UFO observation program by Soviet military and scientists. And even though we know very little that came out from that program, you can see how many videos I made, and I present documents about it, and my books about UFOs and USOs that Philip Mantle and I, that we write together and publish in a number of languages now. We demonstrate what the Soviets had observed, and someday I'm hoping most of the information will be available, not only from the Soviet Union, United States as well, and of course China, because yeah, we're living through very difficult times now, but this subject should not be forgotten, and it will not be. We will come out from this horrible situation with coronavirus, and I hope everybody will stay well. And when our countries again regain the ability to move on forward and to function properly, that attention will still be paid to UFOs, because we are dealing with one of the greatest mysteries of our times, because there is definitely something out there. I know from my research just some of the coordinates that I can point out to you. For example, the moonlet of Mars, Phobos, or certain territories in the former Soviet Union or modern Russia where UFOs have been observed and still are, frequently Yakutia, the Kuril Islands, and so forth. But of course there are other places all over the world, and we need to know more. And I will be presenting more videos to your attention, and I wish well to all my listeners until we meet again. Thank you.